Hey guys, before we get into today's video, I just wanted to say I'm going to definitely be spoiling everything in WandaVision episode 4 and probably everything in 1, 2, and 3. So if you haven't seen the show or you haven't seen tonight's episode, go check that out and then come back here and we'll exchange some theories in the comments. If you haven't seen my first 2 videos on the series, I would definitely recommend checking that out right here. It'll definitely give you a lot of information about the show, and I reference it quite a bit in this video, so it'll help kind of make sense of some things. I really hope you all enjoy the video, and without further ado, let's dive into WandaVision episode 4. I don't mean to be the guy who said I told you so, but I told you so. I told you so. I fucking told you so. I knew I had a good theory, and I knew what was going on. So fuck all you haters who thought that I was wrong. Now, we didn't get any 100% confirmation of Mephisto, but pretty much everything else in my theory got so well confirmed and backed up with tonight's episode. Like, holy shit, guys. And what an episode it was. Like, we got a lot to go over today. So we start the episode seeing a blip scene in a hospital, and it's kind of interesting because, you know, everything's absolute chaos. They don't have the capacity for all of these people just appearing before their eyes and everything, and we see somebody actually, you know, reform slowly, and it's Monica Rambeau, and it's kind of chilling because, you know, she slowly sees herself come back to life with the ash. An interesting thing about the whole thing is she seemed to have had no idea about the fact that she was snapped away. She seemed to have just kind of, you know, fallen asleep, and, you know, she was real wore out, and then, you know, the snap happened, and then all of a sudden she woke up and she was just being reformed. That would be a fucking nightmare. But anyway, it brought up a good point to me, this whole scene, that I had never thought of. Can somebody just be blipped back, like, in a wall? Like, say, you know, someone is standing in a field, or there's a construction worker walking past where a wall is supposed to be built or something, and the snap happened. And then they get blipped back, but it's been 5 years, you know, something may have been built there, or the wall may have been finished, or what have you. And would that mean that they're just kind of stuck in the wall, just like the guy in Doctor Strange at the end, except they wouldn't be able to get out because, you know, they're not a fucking wizard? It's just something kind of scary that whole scene made me think about, just a little eerie. So unfortunately, as we find out, Monica Rambeau had actually fallen asleep because she was so exhausted worrying about her mother's surgery, and she had just found out that, you know, everything was fine and that her mother was about to be discharged that day. But Monica disappeared and her mother didn't, and so a couple years later the cancer that she had just had worked on returned, and unfortunately her mother had passed, and she didn't even know. And so she woke up thinking everything was going to be fine, and then had to find out about everything. And so that kind of sucked, though it did bring up a good point that my girlfriend mentioned to me that I hadn't even thought about. But where did the name Geraldine come from? Because it had to have come from somewhere, and it didn't come from her mom. She didn't, you know, like, it didn't seem like important, and it didn't go over it in this. But she kind of just had it off the top of her head when she was asked what her name was. So I wonder if that'll come into play somewhere later down the road. So after we get the Marvel Studios logo, we see that Monica goes back to Sword Base, and it's interesting to me because Sword Base actually looks, you know, very extensive, and it's kind of, you know, in the middle of nowhere. I'm not exactly sure where this would be placed in the real world, but it is interesting because we find out that Maria Rambeau, Monica's mother, is the one that basically founded Sword when Monica was younger. And so it turns out that Sword has been around since, like, right after the Captain Marvel movie was set in the 80s. And so it's kind of crazy because the Far From Home post-credit scene to my understanding, kind of made it seem like, Sword was just now starting to finally be formed because S.H.I.E.L.D. was, out of the picture, and they, couldn't use that anymore. Plus, the obvious lurking cosmic threats that are now very obvious and, in our faces now. We also find out that Maria Rambeau's codename or nickname in Sword was Photon. And the only reason that's really interesting is because Photon is, for those of you who don't know, Monica Rambeau when she, grows up and basically becomes another version of Captain Marvel. And so it's kind of crazy to me because it just kind of raises the question, are they going to make, Photon just kind of be in Captain Marvel 2 and it be, set, in the 90s or early 2000s or something like that. And, Photon basically be like Captain Marvel on Earth, but that wouldn't really make sense because then where was Photon during all the initial, Iron Man and all that? It kind of makes me think that maybe Monica throughout this show may end up becoming Photon somehow, and she ends up getting the name, the moniker, from her mother, and seeing that being inspired. So they're discussing everything that's been going on since the blip, and we find out that this series takes place 3 weeks after the blip. So we finally actually have a proper, for sure time frame of when the show is set. But thinking about this raised some questions in my head about Wanda and the suburb. So if we're going with my theory, and I think we should, then one, did Wanda make a deal with Mephisto in the Soul Realm while she was snapped away? Or did she make it right after she woke up? Did she wake up and immediately go find Mephisto and seek him out? Or what actually happened between her waking up? Did she wake up and go straight to Westview? Did she still have Vision's body? Did she blip back and was still right there with Vision? Did someone come and get Vision's body? Where is it to begin with? And on that note, I actually saw a few memes between last week's episode and this one's that said, oh, well, what if, she's puppeteering his dead body? And it seemed kind of dumb, but at the end of this episode, something honestly fucking terrifying, like straight up nightmare fuel happens. Honestly fucking terrifying, like straight up nightmare fuel happens, and it kind of legitimizes that theory, and it makes me think maybe he really is being puppeteered and it's actually his dead body with the stone pulled out and everything, and that's why, he is kind of unsure of everything too, and he's still there and seems sentient, but not really. Maybe it's just his dead body with new life breathed into it by Wanda and Mephisto. So we also find out the Sword is working on robotics, nanotech, AI, and sentient weapons, of course, as it is in the name. But this kind of made me think, all of those things could be applied to Ultron. And I mean, Ultron, obviously from last week's episode, has been brought into the fray anyway. So I'm wondering if maybe they're kind of, gearing up to bring Ultron back, because I mean, let's face it, he was a little disappointing in the way that he was used in Age of Ultron. It wasn't really an Age of Ultron, it was more of a couple days of Ultron. And so, he's a big villain in the comics, and he has great potential because, I mean, he's fucking AI that actually is a real threat to our current world. So I really do think that they might, be getting ready to bring him back, not in this show or anything, but maybe in a future movie or something, kind of hinting at it, kind of showing us, hey man, he's still out there. And a little side note, it does show them working on something in this big warehouse, and I couldn't tell what exactly it was, but it looked maybe like a piece of Thanos' ship or one of their weapons or something, some of the wreckage from, I don't know. Honestly, if you know what it was, if you know what scene I'm talking about, I'll probably throw a picture up if I have one. Let me know in the comments if you know what it is or what you think it is. I mean, I sure would love to know your opinion because I couldn't really figure it out. So Monica Rambeau is talking to the director of S.W.O.R.D., and we find out that she's been assigned on this missing persons case because they need some of S.W.O.R.D.'s drones to gather some intel from a certain area that they haven't been able to, and because it's tied in with the FBI, it'll gain the director some major brownie points, and so she goes ahead and does it, even though she's kind of disappointed with the whole thing anyway. So then we get to see Westview from an actual wide shot, and we see that it is just like kind of in the middle of fucking nowhere, dude. Like there's nothing in, you know, a solid at least 5 to 10 mile radius. But it wouldn't matter if there was, because as it turns out, everybody within like a 5 mile radius has this weird like selective amnesia, and you know, I'll go more into depth in that here in a second. Then we get the introduction of, in my opinion, one of the best characters currently in the MCU, Jimmy Woo, portrayed by Randall Park. And it seems that he's been practicing his sleight of hand since Ant-Man and the Wasp. Then he explains that the missing person that she's, you know, there to help with was in witness protection. But, you know, it's not that he went missing and no one's, you know, seen or heard from him, because, you know, witness protection be kind of normal if that happened, but no, he straight up like just disappeared. Like no one's heard of him. And this is kind of elaborated on when they talk to some of the policemen, and they act like the town just doesn't exist. They're sitting there saying, oh yeah, Westview doesn't exist. I don't know what you're talking about. I keep trying to tell your buddy here from the FBI that it's not a real town, even though they're standing like a few feet from the Westview sign. Like, they could literally go and read Westview. But, I mean, it's, like I said, you know, it seems like everyone in this, you know, 5 to 10 mile radius just, like, has no recollection of any of the people or places or things from this town at all. So essentially the entire town basically just seems to be completely missing. And when Jimmy Woo says this, they look and they point out that the population is 3,892. And I'm wondering if, you know, the number will come into play later, but in the case that it doesn't, I did find another way that it kind of ties in, and it's a reach, but hear me out. So if you actually take 3892 and look at it like a European date, that is August 3rd, 1992. So if you actually take 3892 and look at it like a European date, that is August 3rd, 1992. And that date would seem otherwise insignificant, but the movie Unforgiven starring Clint Eastwood and Morgan Freeman actually happened to premiere on that day. Now, what does an old Western have to do with WandaVision, you might be asking? Well, as it turns out, Unforgiven is actually a movie about a bounty being placed on someone's head, and a sheriff who doesn't want any vigilantes or any, you know, people trying to intrude on the town and interfere with it coming in, and basically protecting the town from these opposing people trying to interfere with it. I think it's kind of a funny coincidence that we are also currently watching a show that has to do with someone protecting the town from opposing sides trying to come in and, you know, pull her out or figure out what's going on, you know, and mess with the town. She's trying to protect it from vigilantes. Like I said, I know it's kind of a reach, but I mean, it is kind of interesting, isn't it? So Jimmy Woo actually explains that he hasn't gone in to investigate because he can feel the town doesn't want him to. And he asked Monica, you know, you can feel it too, right? And so we cut and we see them pulling out the drone that she's actually there for to use and help them with. And we see that it's none other than a helicopter. And crazy enough, I mean, it kind of looks like a newer version of the helicopter from the first episode. And obviously, we find out later, it is. When it crossed into the border, it ended up basically assimilating to that time period and turning into an old retro version of it. Now, why it kept the color, no one seems to really understand or can figure out. But when they're flying the drone at the energy field in the first place, Monica's sitting there questioning, you know, well, if we're, you know, this close from it, why don't we have the amnesia? You know, why do you have an awareness of the town or me in general? You know, why aren't you, you know, kind of like just, you know, your brain's turned off to the whole thing just like everybody else's. Why aren't you under the spell? And they discuss that, maybe it's because, they don't have a personal connection to the town, or because, they're far enough away from it. And right as they're talking about all this, boom, the drone just kind of vanishes. And they're like, dude, it was right there. And when you're watching, it's a clear road. Like, there's nowhere it could have, zipped off to or anything without them seeing and hearing it go, but it just kind of poofs out of there. And so Monica's like, what the fuck? And she goes up and checks it out. She's like, where the hell is it? And then she sees the barrier, and it looks like a TV screen, like it's all pixelated and everything. And she's sitting there, oh, what is it? She touches it, and she's kind of, like waving around in it, and then she puts her hand into it, and Jimmy's sitting there like, hey, Monica, you might not want, and right as he's saying that, boom, she gets sucked into it, just against her will. She doesn't walk in like, I had thought she did, but, she does end up getting kind of put under that spell, and we see that, here in a little bit, that she, has no idea. It wasn't, like she just kind of appeared there. And thinking about it now, it kind of makes sense why she seemed so confused. And like in the last episode when she sat there and was kind of snapped out of it, I was like, he was killed by Ultron, wasn't he? It seemed like she was waking up, coming out of it from being blacked out or something. It's almost like, she doesn't know what's going on. She's in this trance-like state. So then we cut to 24 hours later, and surprisingly enough, of all characters, they brought in Kat Dennings, Darcy Lewis. And I thought that was, a little bit crazy, because from what I understood, people really didn't like that character. Or maybe they just didn't like the actress. But, it blew me away that of all people they chose to bring back in, it was her. But it does end up kind of making sense, because she ends up using her knowledge in astrophysics, and it really comes in handy here in a little bit. But we see the SWORD response base, and we see that they're sending drones in left and right, and they're all just disappearing when they hit the border. But when Kat Dennings asks, what kind of data are you getting back from that? Are you, finding something out about, the town, or can you see anything? And they're like, this is classified. So obviously they don't know. They're not getting any data back. But then we find out that the town is actually emitting a huge amount of cosmic microwave background radiation, which, as it turns out, is, and I quote, relic radiation dating back to the Big Bang. And apparently, intertwined with that is a broadcast frequency. So, knowing that, Darcy requests an old TV, and this is when I started to kind of suspect, like, oh, I think that's probably what we saw at the end of the first episode when it pans out and we see, the SWORD base and they're watching the episode. But we don't find that out yet, because it cuts to them sending a hazmat guy down into the sewer, and his suit looks suspiciously like a certain beekeeper that we know of. And so it's pretty obvious that they're sending what turns out to be the beekeeper down into the sewer, but they have a wire hooked up to him so they can just pull him straight back out. And the reason that they're sending him down through the sewer is because they have a theory that, maybe if they go on the sewer, he won't be affected, and he can go back in there and get data and come back out. But the issue is Jimmy Woo actually predicts it, and he says, hey, I'm really worried about this mission. We have no idea if it extends down past the ground. And he's right. And as soon as the dude passes through the actual thing, he turns into the beekeeper. And weirdly enough, the wire behind him turns into a fucking piece of jump rope and just disconnects from him, and they pull out a wire connected to a little end of a jump rope, and they're like, oh, what the fuck? But the weird thing is, it never explains what happens to him. It shows his side of it, where he gets through the sewer and comes out, and she's like, oh no, and then it cuts, and when it does, it flashes forward quite a bit, and we'll get to that later. But it's just crazy to me that we don't know what happened. So did he rewind and go back through and up the sewer, or is he stuck in a loop right there? Like, what's going on with that specific guy? Because they don't really mention him later in the episode at all that I heard of anyway. I might have missed it. But before we get to see any of that, we actually see that they're in a control room. Jimmy Woo is still discussing his worry about the whole mission in general. And then it pans over to Darcy watching WandaVision episode 1 on a TV, and it's the beginning of the Dinner with the Hearts. And we see that the signal is actually being transmitted to the TV, not like, a signal of code or anything like that, but it looks like what we saw when we watched it. It looks like there's a camera there. It's very odd. It's as if a sitcom was actually created and being sent out in wavelengths. And Sword can't really tell yet if it's recorded and being sent out, if it's happening in real time or what. And we find out later in the episode that it's kind of both. It's happening in real time, but it seems like there's a little bit of a delay. So, Sword's working theory. The universe created a sitcom starring 2 Avengers. And, they're pretty much on the right track, but it wasn't the universe that created it. But it's right here that we actually finally get confirmation, and we see the exact same shot from the end of episode 1 where it's panning out and she shuts that little notebook. And it's just so crazy that, I fully, saw and was able to tell that it was a Sword thing and all that good stuff. But it's just nuts to me. Like, I would have never guessed that it was Darcy Lewis at the other end of that computer or monitor. Like, what? Next, Sword starts to analyze the data, and holy shit, so much happens in so little time. We got so many answers and so much information all in a quick fire of like 30 seconds. It was insane. So one of the first things that I noticed was that they're writing on a whiteboard, why is the hexagonal shape important? So it's pretty awesome that theory actually was correct, that the hexagons are coming into play, and it actually probably does have to do with her hex magic or something like that. Now, something interesting that I didn't catch on my first watch through, and again, shout out to my freaking girlfriend, MVP Eagle Eye over here. She caught this before I even saw anything about it. It says right there on the whiteboard that Skrulls might be behind it, which is insane to me because from what I understood, the Skrulls helped Sword be formed and they were working with Sword. We even saw in that post-credit scene in Far From Home that the Skrulls are, taking Nick Fury's place in Maria Hills and they're helping Nick Fury run and operate Sword. So, it's just so crazy to me that, that basically confirms that there are some rogue Skrulls out there and that we probably will get a proper Skrull invasion and quite possibly the Super Skrull. So a few other things that we see is that they're questioning if it's the same space and time as their current reality. They're wondering if Vision's alive. We see that they've tried phone lines to get in and, kind of infiltrate, and that didn't work. And then they kind of start seeing who's who, and we find out pretty much who everybody, all of the supporting characters are. I haven't noticed anything, really interesting or crazy about the names, other than one of them is my last one. But there could be something there that, I just am looking over. So I'm going to go ahead and go through who is who in the actual reality. And if any of y'all catch anything or know of anything that I don't, please let me know in the comments below. So Mr. and Mrs. Hart are apparently actually Todd and Sharon Davis. Norm is a guy named Abalash Tandon. We find out that Jones, the dude with the thick mustache, is actually a dude named Harold Copter. Beverly is actually a person named Isabel Mastueda. And Herb is a dude named John Collins. Now, weirdly enough, we see a wide shot of the pinboard where they're putting everybody's names. And the crazy thing to me is Agnes is up there but has no extra information on her. She doesn't have a real name or anything. And so, that pretty much confirms that, something's up with her, that she's not, what everybody thinks she is. She's not, native to the town or anything like that. And she definitely knows more than she's letting on, and she definitely knows what's up with this spell. She's got an idea. She's got to be there to watch Wanda. I have no shadow of a doubt now. But piggybacking off that, they actually don't seem to have any information on Dottie or Ralph, which I find is very interesting because Dottie is real weird and starts acting suspicious of Wanda all the time, and she's, the leader of the town. So something's got to be up with Dottie, and I don't know who Ralph is yet, but he's got to be important somehow. So here is where we see that Monica is like straight up just fully under the spell, and she had no choice, and she doesn't know what the hell is going on. She's just sitting there reading a newspaper, acting like nothing's wrong. So it definitely isn't until she started interacting with Wanda and heard the name Pietro and all that she started, connecting stuff and putting everything together. But then we see that they go and they try to contact Wanda through the radio, and so we finally see that it actually is Jimmy Woo's voice. I saw a few things online that people were theorizing that it really sounded like him, and, I thought it was kind of far-fetched, but sure enough, that's definitely who it was. And when this happens, someone walks up to Jimmy Woo, like, right after they think, oh, we failed sending the message, and they show him that the helicopter just got found in the show. And when they do this, there was a line that I found was kind of weird. They explicitly mentioned that Dottie is a real person and not a character in the sitcom. So something's definitely up with her. It couldn't have just been a throwaway line. But when they're watching the broadcast of him sending the message, they don't see her breaking the glass and it cutting her hand up. It completely just cuts from them being freaked out to her making the joke about, a housewife cleaning it by her own, whatever. It's a little odd, that we're seeing a little more than they are. It's like we're definitely being clued in more. We're seeing the uncensored version. And we find out later that it definitely is being censored by something or someone. So then we see the part where the hazmat guy crosses over, turns into the beekeeper, all that good stuff. And here's what's crazy to me is we don't actually see anything about the rewinding thing. We only see from his perspective, Wanda saying no, and then it cuts, flashes forward to episode 3 where it shows that, Wanda's drying them off from her water breaking, and it doesn't mention anything about it. I'm sure it will, later, so I'm not trying to question it too much right now, but it's just something I wonder, like, what actually happened to him? Did he rewind back through the sewers, or is he stuck on a loop, or what? Like, something had to have happened to him. So then we see that Darcy's wondering, why it keeps changing eras, why it's not, just staying in the 50s or the 60s, why it keeps on moving to different time periods. And, right as she's questioning this, we notice that on their side, the Ultron scene, it just kind of like cuts to the credits right when Wanda is, kind of cocking her head and kind of like getting ready to do whatever she's going to do to Monica. And so Darcy and Jimmy come to the conclusion that someone or something out there is definitely censoring the broadcast. And I think it's got to be Agnes or Mephisto. Like, they've got to be, controlling what gets sent out so that nothing seems suspicious or, kind of gives anybody clues of what's going on. And that would explain why it kind of just cut back to before Vision started figuring stuff out in the 3rd episode. So then, reasonably, they're wondering, what happened to Monica? I mean, she was right there one second, and the next, she was just gone. So just as they're thinking that, we hear, the boundary's been breached. The boundary's been breached. And we start to assume that, okay, so this is when Monica just gets thrown out of the barrier and, Sword just kind of starts to swarm her. But the camera doesn't follow them out. It sits on the TV, and we see the aspect ratio widen and kind of compress to show the reality of what's going on, just like it did at the end of episode 3. And I just gotta make a comment on that. I love how the aspect ratio, right when it gets to the halfway point of exiting the screen on the sides, it starts to compress on the top and bottom. Like, it's just great editing. Coming from someone who really appreciates editing videos and stuff like that, it's just really fucking cool, man, in my opinion. I love everyone who's working on this show. Then we see what happens to Monica, and Wanda starts walking up to her asking, who are you? And she's saying, I don't know. And, I'm just one of your neighbors. And Wanda just is not fucking having it, because she's like, well then, how would you know about Ultron then? And right here is where we see the first proper use of Wanda's powers. And something about it looks more intense or supercharged, and I think that it might be being affected by Mephisto or Agnes or something. I'm not exactly sure. It might just be, me seeing things, but it definitely looked off. And that reminds me, another thing is Wanda seems to be on just a fucking hair trigger. Like, she gets mad in an instant, and when she gets mad, she blows up. And, I think she's definitely, not fully aware and in control of her own body, at least at times. Because here in a second we see that she says, you aren't my neighbor, and you definitely aren't my friend. You're a stranger and an outsider. And right now, you're trespassing here. And I want you to leave. And she just fucking blows her through the walls. And her wall, her neighbor's walls, several buildings it looks like, and through the barrier of the suburb. Then all of a sudden she comes to, and her magic seems to be kind of powering down. And it looks almost like she blacked out. Like, she kind of lost control for a second. And, she seems to remember everything that happened, but it's almost like she, just tuned out for a second and, just kind of let somebody else grab hold of the wheel for a minute. Then all of a sudden she gets to fixing everything and makes it look like nothing ever happened. And, okay, so this scene, I was not ready for this scene. Me and my girlfriend watched this show right when it drops. Super late at night when it's completely dark out, and, we turn our lights off, we make it kind of like a theater. And Vision was fucking terrifying. Like, holy shit, he was fucking scary. So he comes in and, he's blurred, very heavily, and I kind of noticed on the first watch through that he looks kind of colorless in the face, but I didn't think nothing of it. I was just like, okay, well, maybe, he lost his color. He's, gone back to black and white like the first and second episode, and it's going to be kind of like I let this happen, or something like that, I need to go back to being happy, or something, I don't know. But I sure as hell didn't expect for her to turn around and him to be just, like this. Yeah. And so that's another reason that I do think that it could be his lifeless body just being, puppeteered around and being given life so that, it seems like there's an actual being there in his place during this whole illusion. But Wanda kind of looks down and looks away because she's scared, shitless, reasonably, and scarred. And so then she looks back up and boom, he's back to normal. And that right there tells me that, she's got to be putting this illusion up. And right then, for a second, because of the Ultron thing, it just kind of snapped her out of it, and the illusion broke, and she saw what was really happening and what he really was, and it scared the shit out of her, and she said, oh fuck, I gotta put the illusion back up, I gotta put it back up. Then Vision says, we don't have to stay here, we can go wherever we want, and Wanda says, no, we can't. And she says, this is our home. And, it kind of feels like, she knows that if she leaves this reality, this home, this town, then she's going to be giving up Vision and her kids and her life that she's always wanted. And it's really fucking sad, but then it gets really fucking eerie because she says, don't worry, I have everything under control. And that right there fucking tells me that, I had to be right. She had to have went and made a deal and actually, knows what's going on and can control most of it. Mephisto and Agnes are watching over it, making sure everything still goes according to plan, and that she holds up her end of the deal, which is having the kids and giving them up at the end. Plus then, it cuts to Monica right after she got spat out, and we see her going, oh, it was Wanda. It's all Wanda. I knew it. But unfortunately, this is where it ends, and we see the credits that are, being broadcast through, and it's kind of weird because I didn't notice until my second watch through, but they leave the door straight wide open. And, you know, it is kind of a funny thing, like, oh, why you wouldn't want to do that in the 70s, but not even, you know, thinking about that joke, Vision is still Vision. He doesn't go back into his disguise, he doesn't change, you know, he's just himself. And it's like, once Wanda realizes she has control, now that she's, you know, realized, oh, I don't have to fucking, you know, this is my world, this is my reality, I can do whatever the fuck I want. I think that they have basically decided, oh, we're not going to hide that we're Scarlet Witch and Vision anymore. And I think we're going to see that going forth in the next few episodes. And speaking of episodes, so when this was announced and all the eras got, you know, revealed, I thought that it was going to be 6 episodes, 1 per time period. But as it turns out, there's actually planned to be 9 episodes. So here's what I think after tonight's episode. I'm pretty sure that we're going to get 6 episodes, all, you know, just specifically in the reality of WandaVision. And then we're going to get 3 episodes sprinkled in between there that are Sword in the outside world trying to contact and figure out what is going on and fight this reality and this, you know, illusion that's taking over this entire town. So I guess we're just going to have to tune in next week to find out. I mean, I am super stoked. I'm so along for the ride with this show, guys. I mean, if you aren't watching it by now, then it doesn't make sense. Why are you here at the end of this video? But anyway, guys, that's pretty much all I have to say. I really enjoyed the episode. If there's anything that I missed or that I didn't notice or go over, please let me know in the comments. I'm definitely wanting to have some conversation and open up some dialogue down there. Like, let's get talking about this show. I mean, it's a great show. There's plenty to talk about, so let's go. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like on it. It definitely helps out the channel. Remember to subscribe and share this with somebody who you think would like it or who's into Marvel movies and stuff like that. If you like stuff like this or you like gaming videos, I post them fairly regularly, so don't forget to hit that notification bell so you're notified of everything that comes out in the future. I really appreciate you guys watching, and I hope y'all have a spectacular day. Alrighty. She's not wrong.